Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Shelby Rosasco. It is a pleasure to welcome you guys to our monthly Beef Reproduction Task Force webinar series. Thank you all for logging on tonight to our Q&A session. Couple housekeeping things before we get started. I want to start by thanking our diamond level sponsors, Estrotech and Merck Animal Health, for their contributions to the Beef Reproduction Task Force and supporting our monthly webinar series. We really appreciate all of their support. I also want to remind everyone that we will be hosting the Applied Reproductive Strategies in Beef Cattle meeting this year in North Platte, Nebraska on September 17th and 18th. We are working on getting the schedule finalized, and more information will be posted on the beefrepro.org website. So be checking in on that for more information as we get it. We will also be sharing information about that meeting on our social media. So please connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, X, all of those areas. As we post more information about that meeting, we would love to see everybody there. Also, just a reminder that we do record all of our webinars. So if you've missed a past webinar or you have to leave early on this one, you can find all of those on our website, beefrepro.org, or on our YouTube channel. And all those past webinars are recorded and available there. Last couple of things is we would love to know where everyone is joining us from. So please feel free to put where you are coming to us from in the chat. We would love to see where everyone is from. This is going to be a Q&A session to kind of answer questions you guys have asked in past webinars, in our Ask the Expert box on the website, and then give you guys the opportunity to ask questions live. So for those questions that you guys are going to ask live, please use the Q&A box, not the chat, to ask your questions. So feel free to start putting questions there as you have them. I want to start by introducing the other task force members that are here joining me this evening. First off, we have Dr. Sandy Johnson with Kansas State University. She is joining us, one of our long-term task force members. We also have Dr. Pedro Fontes, Beef Extension Specialist at University of Georgia. Dr. Mario Benelli with University of Florida, Dr. Joe Dalton at University of Idaho, Dr. Kai Puller at Texas A&M University, and then Felipe Moriel with University of Florida. And then we'll have one more member joining us at some point, Dr. John Hall, who's also with the University of Idaho. So if you see him pop up later, I will try to introduce him as he jumps on. So again, this webinar is a little different in that we're not going to have a true presentation this evening, but we will be answering your guys' questions. So we are quickly approaching the breeding season. We're probably 30, 45, maybe 60 days out for a lot of people. So to start out with, I want to ask the group kind of to give some advice. So what's one piece of advice that you would give a producer heading into the breeding season so they can help get prepared for that? So Sandy, do you want to start us off?
Sure. And I guess I just would remind everyone several things about the synchronization planner. We do update that regularly. There's several versions. There's a multi-group version that would allow you to put cows and heifers on the same spreadsheet. Some people want to be able to add some things in relation to recipients, and that multi-group version is an excellent tool to do that with. Right now, I think it was in 2014, we developed an online app at estrasync.com that we're not able to update that. So not everything is on that. If you're trying to use it, it's good for what's there, but doesn't have the most current things. And so as we think about good communication in getting the right thing done on the right day, the Sync Planner is a great tool to use.
Thanks, Sandy. Pedro, do you want to go next?
Yes, thanks, Shelby. Kind of building upon what Sandy just mentioned with regards to planning, uh, we can never emphasize for people to plan enough in advance, right? We know that the here in Georgia, the breeding season for folks that are in spring breeding programs, it actually already started. So if you're planning to start organizing your protocol and you're here in Georgia, you're already late. But for those of you in other parts of the country, it's never too early to put a date on the calendar. But not only that, you place your orders in. We know that it happens very often, and I'm guilty of that as well. Sometimes, UPS or FedEx, things don't flow as smoothly as we want it. We want them to. So I cannot emphasize enough. My wife works for a semen company, so she undergoes a lot of stress making sure people get their semen on time. And the same thing is true for the pharmaceutical companies shipping drugs for synchronization products as well. So if I could send a message in, make a comment here is make sure you're planning in advance and you're placing your orders in advance when it comes to synchronization drugs as well as your semen orders as well.
That is definitely a great piece of advice. Mario, would you like to go next?
Yes, I do. Hello, everyone. Still building on the other people's advice. One person that you don't want to miss to put in your calendar in advance is the inseminator. Unless you are breeding the animals yourselves or a family will be breeding the animals. If you need the help from someone, make sure you have them on your schedule as soon as possible. It happens, you hear from other producers that are implementing or using AI for a second, third time. They, hey man, I didn't talk to my inseminator this year, and he was already booked. So I had to, find somebody else that, maybe you don't know, maybe it's not as skilled. So that's one piece of the puzzle that's very important to put in place. So make sure that you talk to your inseminator and have him or her on schedule. And a second thing that I also usually recommend to the producers using AI is to make sure that they check the semen that they have on their container. Sometimes they don't want to do it. They don't want to spend one dose of semen, but it's very important that you check it. You never know. Maybe everything goes bust because, something that happened before the semen arrived, you don't know about it. So it doesn't matter. Just ask your specialist to put under the microscope, take a look on the motility. Everything is fine, then that's a go. So I'll stop here for now.
Great advice. Joe, how about you go next?
Okay, thanks, Shelby. This is good. I'm starting kind of right after Mario's suggestions, and I would continue that if you or family members or ranch employees are performing the AI, have a mental list or a paper list of everything you need prior to the breeding season. So what do we need? We need all the equipment. We need AI guns and sheaths. We're going to need our thaw baths. We're going to have some way to power the thaw baths, whether it's going to be a USB adapter that goes into the pickup, or it's going to be extension cords that go into an office or something like this. Tweezers and scissors, paper towels, all those types of things. And then go through the exact process. So where is the semen? It's in the liquid nitrogen storage tank, but we don't want to be searching for it. We want to know it's in canister 3. We want to know that we have 25 doses of this bull or that bull and where it's stored without even looking in the tank. So we want to have our inventory outside of the tank. It could be on our phone. It could be on paper. And then go through the gymnastics. How are we going to thaw it? Well, we're going to thaw it 95 to 98 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 to 37 degrees Celsius. We're going to thaw for a minimum of about 45 seconds. We're going to dry it, load it into the gun. We're going to cut it, put a sheath on it. We're going to maintain temperature to a cow that's already restrained and ready for us. Then we're going to inseminate that animal. And I would just say plan for success with AI regardless of the number of animals you're inseminating, whether you're inseminating one based on estrus or whether you're inseminating 100 based on a timed AI. Think about what you're going to do, plan for success.
That's great. Thanks, Joe. Kai, anything from you?
Yeah, just two things just to build on that. So I would say have realistic expectations, which I think a lot of you have heard me talk about before. And then two would be critical. And if you make a mistake, whether it's giving the wrong drug, whatever it might be, call somebody, ask the expert on beefrepro.org. I promise you, we've seen all the mistakes possible and we've made them all ourselves, and we can help you troubleshoot to salvage what's possible. We hope that doesn't happen, but we know sometimes that does happen. So plan for realistic expectations and success, but also don't be afraid that if you make a mistake to reach out for help.
That's great. Thanks, Kai. Philippe.
Yeah, I would also try to remind everyone, don't disregard the nutrition of those cows, right? Even if she's in good condition, you want to continue in those lines. You want to make sure that at least they maintain. You don't want them to start losing too much body condition score before the breeding season or even during the breeding season. That's going to throw you off on a lot of those pregnancy rates. And if she's not in a good condition, there's still something you can do. Make sure you talk to a nutritionist in your area to help you out.
Great, thank you. So we've had a few questions start coming in. The first one is, if you were using a timed AI protocol and a cow shows heat 24 to 48 hours prior to time of insemination, should you breed or follow timed insemination time? Joe, do you want to take a stab at this one first? And anybody feel free to jump in if you want as well.
So the time frame was 24 to 48 hours before timed AI. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, I would go ahead and breed that cow. I would essentially go ahead and breed that cow, because in my mind, if we're waiting until timed AI, we've waited too far. And then what would likely happen is we would have an egg that had already ovulated, and the egg would wait for the sperm cells, which is not the situation we ideally want to have. Ideally, we want to have sperm in the reproductive tract prior to ovulation, whether it's based on an estrus detection or timed AI. And I'm going to stop there because others.
I would just add that, remember, fixed timed AI does work. Okay, so if you can't get that cow bred, it's not that there's a 0 chance she'll get pregnant. Okay, we probably reduce the odds some, but if you've got a technician coming, don't keep that cow away from him. You could install less expensive semen, but you know, I've seen some long intervals there when that was the only way they could have got bred was AI. So if you can, great. If not, still put semen in them.
Great. Anything else from anybody else on that question? Question on, it looks like maybe the estrus sync planner. There's a couple questions there, Sandy. So one, could you kind of go over it a little bit more, and then I'll give you the more specific question.
Sure. You know, the estrus synchronization planner is designed to kind of step you through some choices. How much heat detection do you want to do? Have a choice about Bos indicus, Bos taurus, and what type of semen. And then we look at what protocols. Now, what we've tried to do is the recommended protocols are things that we have data on. And so I think the question that's come in asks about why the 7 and 7 doesn't show up with a combination of heat detection and cleanup timed AI. And so the decision was made that if we didn't have data on it, we weren't going to put it as recommended. But what I would tell you is that any of these protocols, if you're going to breed on heat, I don't care what protocol you use, you want to breed on heat, do that. And then you could do a cleanup timed AI or not as you wish. But there's, when you're breeding on heat, really, there's no limitations beyond your willingness to check heat and how often you want to, be pulling animals and breeding them.
That was great, and you kind of answered the more specific question that was on the 7 and 7 and why wasn't that included in that estrus planner. So thank you. Next question is, and Joe, maybe this is one that you can touch on a little bit. Do you have the same pregnancy rate when using quarter cc and half cc straws?
Okay, great question. So the answer is that there is no statistical difference when you have very, very large numbers of AIs. Jeff Stevenson looked at this years ago. It's published in Journal of Dairy Science. Where we do see differences between technicians that use quarters or half cc straws is in those technicians that tend to be a little bit sloppy or have less skill level, because the quarter cc straw has a smaller surface to volume ratio and is more impacted by poor semen handling. But someone who is well trained, is paying attention, is working with cattle that are healthy and good body condition score, et cetera, we will not see a measurable difference between halves and quarters.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have anything on that one?
Hey, Joe, this is Kai. Just to add to that, I made that comment to someone the other day, the same exact data that you just cited. And I think one thing that we need to clarify is that's comparing sort of, head-to-head conventional, right? In quarter cc conventional to quarter cc or to half cc conventional. And sometimes people get it confused that, yes, sex semen only comes in quarter cc, and that wasn't compared in that case. We're comparing conventional, and was the comparison that was made.
Exactly, Kai, and that's a great point, that the data is conventional half cc versus conventional quarter cc, and virtually all of the sex semen, either research or that's commercially available, is in quarter cc straws. So that's very true. It's not in half cc straws.
That's great. Thank you both. So there's a nutrition question on here. So Philippe, I'm going to kind of direct this to you to start, but certainly others feel free to jump in. So the question is asking about how much extra feed or nutritional management of cows or heifers in an AI program.
Right. That's a very specific answer, right? So it depends on a lot of factors. Depends on if you're spring calving, fall calving. Depends on their body condition score, right? How much they're losing. What's your forage status? How much grass do you have? Do you have supplements or not? What kind of supplements? So it's a multitude of factors that can influence that. But the main thing is know the history of your location and know the condition. Look at the condition of those cows and make sure that you test the forage and make sure that you have plenty of grass for those animals. And then we can develop a specific nutritional program for them so that they at least maintain their body weight, body condition score throughout that, at least the beginning of the breeding season. But yeah, I wish I would have a direct answer, let's say 5 pounds, 6 pounds, but that varies so much.
Yeah, and I would agree, right? Without knowing a specific feed situation, it's really hard to give an exact amount. but I think Philippe and I did a webinar a couple years ago talking on the impact of body condition score and making sure those cows are in good condition before they start calving, so that you're not behind the 8 ball there. So I would be thinking about condition earlier than you think you need to, and keeping those cows on a good plane of nutrition and a good plane of nutrition throughout the breeding season as well. We can't stop thinking about nutrition after we turn them out after AI. So those are some things to keep in mind. Does anybody else want to add anything on that one? It's a very open-ended question there.
I just agree with you, Shelby, that the consistency of that nutrition throughout the breeding season is important. I think we've got good research that shows if there are dramatic changes in nutrition during the breeding season, we can affect early embryonic mortality. Some of the other things that I think that is a reminder is that goes along with the research that was done is for those of us in the West that are usually doing AI maybe in dry lots and then turn out to pasture, that quick change from a dry lot ration to pasture and changes in grazing behavior and dry matter intake and all those things Philippe talked about can have a huge impact. So try and get the animals on the type of system that they're going to be prior to AI. So if they're going to be out on pasture, if you can get them out on pasture, even if you're supplementing them on pasture to start with, that'll help make that transition so they're not making such a big nutritional shift.
Yeah, absolutely. That nutritional management is really important. And, there's some really compelling data, even showing the impacts of just a decreased nutrition 7 days after 6 or 7 days after AI. So it can be a quick impact there. So thank you for that. Anybody else want to chime in on that one at all?
For the people that are in drought-prone areas that forage, we turn out and always have anticipation of how much forage is going to grow, but underestimating that in these situations can be a problem. So just be conservative if you have high expectations for your AI program and the outlook for grass growing is dim.
Yeah, I know we're all praying for rain in the western part of the US right now. So hopefully we get a little bit more than we've had so far. Next question is about looking at price. Is there a program or software package that can give us a price per AI or pregnancy, which includes everything except labor using either estrus sync or OVSync?
Would take a stab at that because you can get a lot of that information from the estrus synchronization planner. The only feed cost it includes is with a MGA program, so you would have to calculate that separately in most cases, but you can compare 3 different systems. We've got some default cost in there for products, but you need to put your own cost in there, and you can include labor. I have a number that calculates labor. I don't know that it is a number. So put in what you need for labor or not if you want that as part of your comparison, but work through that sync planner and that should go a long way to getting you the information that you want. If you need any help, please let me know.
Yeah, that estrus sync planner is a great program. You can get a lot of really great information out of that. So next question, and this can be really for anybody in the group, is what is the life of a water bath? They had one go bad that they only discovered using a thermometer to confirm temp, but the light was green and the water was at 103 degrees.
I'll jump at that. Yeah, that's a great question. The green light and the red light and that type of visual can be misleading as you're describing. So you always want to have not only the card thermometer, those are very common and they're good, They work very well, but you also want to have at least a dial thermometer or an old mercury thermometer to check and make sure that the thaw bath is appropriate. Should they last 5 years or 20 years? I really can't speak to that. I think you have to check them regularly. And I would argue, and when I teach AI, I tell everyone you should be checking the temperature every day on that thaw bath and potentially have a backup in case there's a problem.
Great, thank you. And I see that Sandy has put a link to the Ester Sync Planner in the chat. So if you're interested in that program, the link's there. You can also find it on the beefrepro.org website. So the next question is somebody's has a client using a 7-day co-sync CEDAR protocol with timed AI. How can they convince their client to detect for 3 days? They always detect it on timed AI and the day after, but they miss those heifers or animals that came in early. They're usually getting about 50 to 55% conception rate. Maybe Mario, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. There usually not gonna be any animal coming in heat by 24 hours after you remove the CEDAR. By 36 hours in our hand, we're gonna have a handful of animals, so maybe 5% of the animals. And then by 48, 60, and 72, in our hands here, this is when most of the animals will be coming in. So, the producer can check heat perhaps starting at 36 hours, but 24 hours, it's going to be really rare. It's going to be very, very, very few animals. So the first 1 day can be removed. So it's actually checking heat for 1.5 days, not for 3 days. So yeah, but 3 times I think would be advisable. And of course, we usually use some kind of a heat detection aid, like Astrotech or any other of your preference. So then you don't have to be on top of your horse, just checking cow by cow, seeing which one is accepting to be mounted. You just check that breed indicator and then plan your inseminations appropriately for the next 12 hours if you do AM PM rule. So yeah, no, so they will not need to check for 3 days, perhaps for 1.5 days.
That's great. Pedro, you want to add anything to that?
I was going to make a quick comment, and I would recommend really, really thinking about the producer you're working with and the number of animals you're working with. I think there are some situations that sometimes we're willing to give up, maybe 1 or 2 pregnancies, and stick to the time AI for the sake of logistics, depending on the size of the herd. And that's how we try to work with producers here. If you can't afford doing a little bit of heat detection, you're not gonna make huge improvements in fertility if you breed those females that show heat early, because just like Mario said, that there's not a lot of them, right? But if you're breeding a smaller group and you can afford spending the time to go there and maybe sort those females that show heat early and potentially breed them, you might have a better chance in that specific female that show heat early. But from a herd average standpoint, it's very unlikely that you're gonna see major improvements if you do that. Okay, so again, if you're an AI technician working with your producer, I think you got to study on a case-by-case basis and make sure it makes sense from a logistics standpoint, and you're not just going to add labor and give them another thing to worry about to not necessarily sometimes capture a lot of fertility. That's why fixed time AI protocols are great, because we know they work, right? So there's some opportunities to incorporate some heat detection with it, but we need to be mindful that they're not going to cause major changes in herd fertility to the fixed time AI program. Maybe to individual animals that show heat earlier, but from a herd standpoint, yeah, we got to be mindful of that too.
That's great. And they did, that individual did respond back and said they're using Estrotech. There's 90 cows. 17% were in heat at 48 hours and not bred that day. So anybody else want to chime in on that one? I think the comments that were made are really great is thinking about,
Shelby, sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead, Kai.
No, I'll just add one point that, the pregnancy rate's already pretty high, 55%. I mean, not high, but I mean, I would say it meets our expectations for where the protocol should be. So, if I was trying to convince the producer on how do you squeeze 5% more out of that herd, that would be an option to do that. And sort of it comes down to, is that 5% worth the extra labor and cost to make that happen? And that's a financial calculation ultimately, I think, for the producer.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and I think some great comments were already made. Sandy, did you have something else?
Well, I went back to see if they are cows. So if he's, even if they're coming in at 48 hours, if that's when they first came in, 48 hours on an AM PM rule, you'd be reading those at 60 hours. Okay. And so, yeah, you're breeding them a little bit later with that first AI, the split timed AI, but not that much later. And would just remind you that dairies used to routinely breed once a day, I believe, Joe. Is that not correct? And when I was a kid, that we could breed once a day. That's what we could do. And I recall that Dr. Kinder didn't believe my AI pregnancy rates, but I brought my books in and we discussed that, and maybe it was possible to get 60% breeding once a day. So, and that was heat detection.
Yeah, it has to go back to what you're able to do and what you're able to do consistently. That's the key. We can get acceptable fertility with once a day breeding if we are committed to once a day breeding and we perform once a day breeding in the same manner. The same thing goes for AM PM rule.
That's great. Thank you, guys. So question, and it is referring a comment, Mario, that you made earlier about checking semen before use, but probably one that, Joe, you could also jump in on a little bit, is if using semen from a commercial reputable company, is checking that semen really necessary? And maybe go into how they should check that semen, who should check the semen, and give a determination there and what they should be looking for.
I'll get started. You know that the many beef cattle producers, they are not the most aggressive into adopting technology. So then we are trying to sell a technology that's been around for a while, but perhaps they are new to the technology, or perhaps all they hear is that, it's not successful. People only get 25, 30% pregnancy. So then you go and you teach them, you educate them step by step. And then at some point, we hear many times that the result from artificial insemination is a summation of all is actually a multiplication of product of the success of many of the smaller parts involved. So then at the end, they get 30% of pregnancy, and then you ask them, were cows in good condition? Yes. Did you give the right dose, the right drugs at the right time? Yes. Did they show heat? Yes. So what is the explanation? So, it's just one more conservative way to cover all of your bases that there was not a major failure at some link of the chain. I agree, reputable companies should not sell you a semen that, has thawed, but how was that handled? Is that really traceable all the way to that moment that you have the cow in front of you to inseminate her? How the producer handled that semen from one breeding season to the next breeding season? Was the liquid nitrogen every time present? Was that person on top of it all the time? So I mentioned it as one more point to check to make sure and to validate, hopefully a good result, but perhaps a bad result that a producer is having.
So we have a little bit of a difference of opinion here, and that's okay. It's good for a discussion. I would delineate semen that has been passed from tank to tank to tank. I'm buying 10 units from the guy down the road because he had his bull custom collected and I really like that bull or something like that. That in that case, I agree with Mario on this point because likely that semen has greater potential to be compromised because it's moving around from tank to tank. If I am sourcing semen from one of the big multinational AI studs and my rep is bringing it to the farm or it's coming in by DHL or FedEx or whoever, and I'm handling it properly, I don't believe that there's an issue that there's a need to do that. But with semen that's been kind of sold by semen jockeys, yeah, that is could be problematic. So that's kind of the way I would handle it, the way I would look at it. But Mario also brings up an excellent point: is how do we manage the semen from season to season? And that's an excellent point. So my argument there is that you get it on a calendar in your phone or in the manager's phone, and you got to check the level of liquid nitrogen in that semen tank in the off season. You have to. And you have to have the rep come out and fill the tank at appropriate intervals. And the AI tanks we have now, right on the outside, it's plastered, whether it's a 20-week tank or it's an 8-week tank or it's a 16-week tank. And those are recommendations, but we should work together with our semen supplier to get on their calendar so that they come at an appropriate time to fill the tank. So a lot going on there. But anyway, I'll stop. That's my kind of
So if they need to check, right? They've bought it, they've had an issue with the tank, something like that. Can you kind of expand on what they should, should they have somebody else come look at it? If they're going to check it themselves, what should they be looking for? Just expand on that part a little bit. Joe, do you want to maybe take that one?
I'm actually gonna let Mario jump in there first, and then I'll go afterwards.
I was reading the chat. I didn't pay attention to the question. Can you just repeat it, please?
No problem. There's a lot going on. So the other kind of part of that question was, who should, if they need to check it, right? They've bought it, they're concerned, there's something like that. Who should they get to check it? Or if they're going to try to check that themselves, what should they be looking for?
Yeah, the recommendation would be to take it to a specialist. Hopefully their local vet would be able to take a look at it. Yeah, unless they are really seasoned breeders that have the training. Yeah, I wouldn't tackle that if you're not a professional.
I completely agree. I completely agree. This has to be done in controlled situation where the tank has been controlled and it's in a lab and we're using pre-warmed equipment. We're thawing appropriately, and the veterinarian would really be the best person, especially if we're talking about rural America. The veterinarian would be certainly the best person and the most skilled person to be able to do that.
And I'll just jump in, and this is Kai. I'll add one point here. I think that all those comments are great. I think that one thing that I always recommend to people when I get a call and says, I had my veterinarian check straw semen. We don't think it's good. What do we recommend doing? I always say, go back to the source. Go back to where you purchased it from, whether that's one of the major AI companies, custom collection facility, the person you bought it from out of their tank. And go back to them and have a discussion with them, have them check a straw, whatever you need to do before you start to sort of accuse or challenge someone on what might be taking place. It's just a lot cleaner, I think, if it's done that way. The other thing is, I was just going to ask Joe if he would mind just sharing a little bit about CSS and non-CSS semen, Joe. Just from your point of view, I think a lot of times I think, you know, people get confused in thinking about, well, CSS is sort of dealing with export, but also has to do with sort of quality regulations. And so could you just speak a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I definitely will. So CSS stands for Certified Semen Services, and it's a voluntary audit program that is a component of National Association of Animal Breeders. Okay, and the AI centers that want to be CSS certified, they agree to organize their records in a certain manner, to house their bulls in a certain manner, to have bulls that are fed in a certain manner, managed, vaccinated, everything that we can think of relative to animal husbandry. Semen is processed in an appropriate manner. Antibiotics used are antibiotics that are known to be efficacious in semen straws, etc. All of these things. So getting to Kai's point, can we, if we have a bull, can we take a bull to a custom collection place and not have that bull be certified semen services? Absolutely, we can. Okay. Can we take a bull and have him housed at the facility, have him meet all the requirements, and then be CSS? Yes, we can. So you have a greater standard, a higher bar, if you will, for those bulls and for those management strategies and processing strategies that are CSS. And that is a concern, especially among custom collection, but for the dairy industry now, because of the amount of beef semen that's being used. So the question always that we have is, well, where's the source of the beef semen? And certainly if it's from one of the big studs, they are CSS. But sometimes if we're buying beef semen from someone down the road, it may not be CSS. And that just means it was processed at a little bit different standard. It does not necessarily mean it's bad. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it wasn't processed at the most stringent standards that we have in the industry currently. So that would be kind of the demarcation of CSS versus non-CSS semen.
Joe, is every bull in a custom collected stud go through a breeding soundness exam and semen evaluation prior to freezing?
So yeah, it would be standard operating procedure to have entry requirements that are going to include a breeding soundness evaluation, but not only that, physical, weather, locomotion, just everything. Yes, that would be standard procedure to go into an AI center. There was one thing I wanted to add, and this goes back to Kai's point about if you suspect that, hey, there could be an issue with semen, I would argue, yes, go back to the source, as Kai said. If we bought it from so-and-so, if we bought it from this custom collector or from this national or international business, that's perfect. If you have straws that you bought that are on the same cane or in the same group, in the same canister, I would argue you need to retain those don't use those, because AI studs will ask for those, and they will send a rep to come get them and either to send them back to the home office, or they will go to an impartial third party. And when I was at Virginia Tech, I was fortunate enough to work with Dr. Saki, and there were times where Dr. Saki would receive semen in question, and he would be blinded. They would not tell him what they expected, and then he would evaluate the semen and provide an evaluation to the parties. And that still occurs. I know that still occurs. I don't happen to do it, but I know there are scientists, certainly domestically, that do that.
That was a really great discussion. Thank you, guys. So next question, and this is probably directed towards you. Philippe is our kind of resident nutrition person, but I'd love to get feedback from others on this as well. Is what are your thoughts on mineral breeding tubs from the various companies? Are they worth the added expense? They usually contain chelated minerals, omega fatty acids, prebiotics, etc. Do those work, and do they make a difference?
Yeah, so yeah, I would love to hear the opinion of everybody else on that too. Now, if it's the only mineral source that they have available, are they worth it? Yes, right? If they're consuming it. Now, if they have been on a good trace mineral nutrition, right? Meaning that they have consumed the supplement all throughout the year, now right before going to the breeding season. Usually it's not these added expenses doesn't make a lot of sense, right? That's what happens here in our case. And I'm talking strictly about trace minerals. Right? I'll touch on the type of trace minerals, omega fatty acids in a minute. So in our conditions, at least, right, we have fall calving. Those animals consume the trace mineral supplement throughout the spring, summer, and fall, like with no problem. Like in fact, they consume a lot more than what they need. So when they go into the breeding season at the start of winter time, they usually have a lot of trace minerals in their reserves. And even though they don't consume the trace mineral supplement throughout the breeding season, they still do very well. Now, because their reserves is pretty high, they can mobilize as they need. Now, that would be a totally different situation if they were not in a good trace mineral supplement and they were not consuming, they become deficient, and then you see these problems at breeding season. Now, regarding the chelated minerals, there's research at least on the reproductive performance as being very inconsistent. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't, and not sure why. And I think it's probably related more to the trace mineral status of those animals going into the breeding season than the actual source of the type of source, right? There's some research on pregnant cows that if you provide the organic minerals, the offspring tended to do a lot better, like greater weaning weights, better performance in the feedlot. But there's very limited research on that. I know about hydroxychloride as being something that people have focused a lot lately. Now, it's not the chelated one, but it's the hydroxychloride sources. There's some research with Terry Engel in Colorado. He shows that at least the first year did not increase pregnancy rates, but the following 3 years, meaning those animals were 4 years into the same type of supplement, their breeding season, the conception rates to AI was significantly better in years 2, 3, and 4. So the added cost of those was definitely worth it. Now, we have done a lot of research with that, but more related to performance and not related to the pregnancy rates. But so even in performance, the hydroxychloride seems to be a good strategy, right, for those animals. Now, the omega fatty acids, there are a lot of research that is very consistent with Boscinicus and Bos taurus animals, that as long as they consume about 100 grams of those high linoleic acid fatty acids for at least 21 days after the AI, the conception rates increased by roughly 10 percentage points. And that's, I'm not sure how much it costs right now, but 10 percentage points, it seems pretty good to me. It most likely will cover the cost of that. Now, the prebiotics, I'm not aware of any research on that. We have worked recently with probiotics, right? With more specifically with the Bacillus type. So Bacillus is a type of bacteria that has a lot of benefits to to the rumen and to the intestines. Of all the research that we did with heifers, with mature cows and growing calves, right? It varies too. Now, with mature cows, we did not see an increase in conception rates when we provide that type of probiotic, but we do see an improvement in their body condition score, right? And that helped with pre-weaning performance of their calves. Now, the other study that we did with that was with pregnant heifers. Again, it did not increase the pregnancy rates of those heifers, but it did improve the performance of the offspring once they were born, right? Heavier weaning weights, better immune responses. Now, with developing heifers, the probiotics, what we saw is there's no added benefit to their growth, but we did see an increase in conception rates to time AI. So right now, I can tell that at least the probiotics right now, the prebiotics, it seems it's very feasible for growing heifers, but it has not increased the conception rates in mature cows so far.
And if I can add one comment there, Shelby, with regards to the polyunsaturated fatty acids, if you're going to use that type of supplementation, make sure you're using a what some people would refer to as a protected or partially protected source. Okay, so if you're feeding, let's say, a calcium, make sure if you're feeding those, you're feeding a calcium salt. Okay, so that's the ingredient that will be protected. Otherwise, those polyunsaturated fatty acids, they get broken down in the rumen. So ultimately, you're not going to be providing the adequate profile of fatty acids. So not all fat is the same. So make sure if you're trying to get those nutraceutical effects that Philippe Muriel mentioned, you're using a protected source of polyunsaturated fatty acid, like a calcium salt of soybean oil, for example.
Yeah, but thanks for the reminder. That's a great point. Not only that type of the calcium salts or polyunsaturated fatty acid, but also make sure that you're providing the ones that has high linoleic acid. There are some fat that are protected too, but it's mostly saturated fat. So that would be only the energy source. It will not have any of the benefits to reproduction that way we want, right? It has to be the ones with high linoleic acid.
And if you have questions, those names are complicated. As you think about the profile of fatty acids, things can get quite confusing. So if you have any questions about a specific supplement, you can always send that to us, and we can go over and see if the ratio of those fatty acids are similar to the studies that have seen that consistent improvement in fertility that Felipe mentioned.
Quick comment on the chelated minerals. I think one of the things that producers need to be aware of and take the time to do is get good mineral analysis of the forage base and judge their mineral supplementation on that. For example, where we are, there's a lot of antagonisms. We have high sulfur and high molybdenum. So we get thiomolybdenates, binds up a lot of copper. So in our area, there's some benefit to using the chelated coppers because that provides an extra margin of absorption that helps fight some of those antagonisms that we have. So I think it's very important. And then another thing that I think Philippe mentioned that I'd like to say, especially on the trace minerals, having that mineral program in place well before the breeding season is important to have those mineral levels up and those storage levels in good shape. A little different from the omega-6 fatty acid supplementation, where closer to AI, you'll get a benefit. If you're starting your mineral program right at the time of AI, you're probably going to be disappointed in your results.
Anybody else have any thoughts on those that they want to add? Those were great points, and I would go
I
ahead.
do, Trevor. The last one is we had a lot of questions about that. Is the injectable trace minerals, right? And there's a lot of research on that. We did some studies in Brazil. And overall, what we found was that if you do inject them at the beginning of the breeding season, it did help with the pregnancy rates of cows if they are in low body condition score, lower than 5. Now, cows that were in body condition score greater than 5 and they had been on a regular trace mineral program, it did not add any benefit to their reproduction. So that's my experience with that one.
Yeah, those are all great reminders, is getting that, having a good mineral program in place. And John, again, being in the western half, I get a lot of mineral questions and asking, and it's usually thinking about what's in your forage, what's your soil type, what's in your water, and really tracing that down and making sure you're making a good decision based on what your cows need. So the other thing I'd say is don't forget about the minerals for your bulls. There's some minerals that are pretty darn important for those bulls, and we tend to put them out in a pasture and not think about them very often. But outside of AI, if we're going to turn out that bull to clean up, or even just a natural service protocol, don't forget that they also will benefit from a good mineral program as well. So a couple questions on here about the sync drugs. One of them is asking about the effectiveness of giving the sync drugs in the neck versus in the hip. Does anybody want to jump on that and address that?
I can address that one. Yeah, that's a common misconception, and I get that question quite often as well. But all those drugs are going to act systemically, okay? And in fact, a lot of the drugs that we give in synchronization programs, they actually act in the brain. So there's no, if you give it in the hip, you're not going to be any closer to the brain if that was the rationale there. So ultimately, those drugs were developed to be administered systemically, to be administered to have a systemic effect. Okay, so there's no real benefit to giving injections in the hip versus the neck. That being said, the recommendation is to always give injections in the neck to make sure you follow BQ8 standards. And since you're in the topic of injections, that's something that we see a lot of mistakes. It didn't happen once or twice that we go and we get to visit a producer that we're not necessarily working close with, but we're there in the day they're synchronizing cows or the day they're AIing. And very often I see misuse of needles from a length of needle standpoint. So one of the things to keep in mind as you get ready for the breeding season, make sure you're looking at the label of those products, those sync products, and you're using the correct size needle, right? So if you're supposed to give a 2 cc or a 2 mil injection intramuscularly, so in the muscle, all 2 cc's need to be deposited in the muscle. Right, so sometimes we're in a rush and our needle is a little bit shorter than it's supposed to, and probably about half of that dose, maybe 1 cc or a half a cc gets injected subcutaneously. So make sure you're depositing the whole product in the muscle. So you're using the correct length needle and the correct route of administration. The majority of the sync products, they're going to be done intramuscularly, with some exceptions are done subcutaneously. So make sure you read the label, and then based on the label, you select the correct size needle and you give that injection in the neck with the animal restrained, following BQA standards.
So the other part of that question, and anybody can jump on this part, is what are the most effective drugs in each class? Are there any that are better than others?
That's a great question. I will just jump in. Everything that we have that is approved by the FDA for use in cattle is of appropriate effectiveness. And producers in Idaho or Montana or wherever will not see a difference in animals that are healthy, well-managed, good body condition, with appropriate management strategies in place. And that would include storage of drugs, etc.
So the other question that probably goes along with that is somebody asking, is anybody else seeing shortages on the sync drugs available. They've ran into that issue recently. Would you purchase per breeding season, or would you buy per year if you're running both a fall and spring calving herd? Does anybody want to take a stab at that one? John, do you maybe want to
Yeah,
want
I
to
can.
that
Yeah,
one?
we can talk about that a little bit. I don't think we've seen too many shortages at this point, although I have heard rumors of shortages. I think to back up what Joe said, that means that because all these drugs are equally effective, then you can look for an alternative. As far as, getting the season's worth, if you have both spring and fall breeding seasons, there's nothing wrong with that as long as the drugs that you're getting are not going to expire before your next breeding season, and that you store them properly. And that includes, we talked about having a thermometer to check your temperature in your thaw bath. You also need to have a thermometer to check your temperature in your refrigerator and make sure that that refrigerator is at the right temperature, and especially not freezing anything. But those are some comments, I guess on that. Certainly we don't want to get into a hoarding situation, and obviously we don't want to be in a situation where we spent considerable funds on estrus synchronization drugs and then they expire on us before we use them. So I guess my comments on whatever other people have would be great to hear.
Yeah, I'll just add in. This is Kai. I mean, there are some shortages that I think are happening, and we're seeing at least across Texas and the Southeast. But I think that John's point about sort of finding another product in that category is totally appropriate. And I just would, if you think about prostaglandin, you think about GnRH, and you think about those products in regards to sort of these companies, big pharma profiles that make them. They're way down on the list in regards to sort of the volume and the price return that they bring in, and so I think sometimes some of it is driven by that. But again, you can find other products in those categories that do just as well, and shouldn't be an issue. I haven't heard of anything that would suggest that we have a prostaglandin shortage or we have a GnRH shortage. We might have brand name shortages in those areas, but not a shortage across the board.
Kai, do you want to comment on maybe the FSH shortages that we had recently, more on the ET side? I know we changed this topic a little bit, but maybe visit on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So up until 2024, we've had one source of FDA approved follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH, which is the Vetroquinol product or the Phalotropin product by Vetroquinol. And in 2024, there was a shortage of that, which then allowed for a secondary product to come into the market on an emergency, temporary basis on a limited amount of the FSH. And now everything is pretty much back to normal on that. So we shouldn't be seeing any shortages in that area, and hopefully it continues that way. So I think that's a pretty stable situation right now. At least last week when I had a few conversations about that. And I see Ed just commented that there's no shortage on Phalotropin, so thanks for that, Ed.
That's great. Thanks, guys. So we are getting close to our hour. We have two kind of follow-up questions from answers we gave earlier. So the first one, Joe, this is probably directed towards you. Is most Brazilian semen process under a program similar to CSS?
Okay, that's a great question. So I'm not going to be able to say whether it is or not. Can it be? And the answer is absolutely, it can be. CSS is not a domestic program, it's an international program that is monitored by a domestic entity. So that's about the best way I can answer that. So yes, they definitely could be under CSS standards. And actually, the way to tell, so it's very easy because it's visual. So when you pass CSS audits on an ongoing basis, then you have the ability to use the CSS logo on your straws. And the logo will actually be on the straw. So that is one way of a visual indicator that this straw met CSS standards.
Thanks. Does anybody else have any comments on that kind of follow-up question?
I think just one of the points is, if I read the question correctly, it's more, are there similar programs to CSS, around the world? And so Joe already pointed out sort of the international aspect of CSS. I mean, I think that I can't remember, and maybe Pedro or Mario can help me. There is a program in Brazil that sort of is under the Minister of Ag's office. I think that is sort of a federally managed program in regards to registering of animals, getting them into a bull stud, the quarantine that goes into that, all of those factors. So most countries, major sort of, I would say, beef or dairy producing countries that have semen collection facilities have some regulatory guidelines in place for sort of managing those, whether they're reciprocal to what we have at CSS, and whether they're not, it is up for debate from that point of view.
Pedro, do you have anything else to add on that one?
No, I agree with Kai. Yeah, I don't know what's the official mandate when it comes to, or I guess entity that does the inspections, but the process is very similar from a quality control standpoint, from a quarantine, from a transit of personnel within the facilities. Everything is really strictly controlled in Brazil. And keep in mind that a lot of the companies that are here in the US, they're also present in Brazil as well. So the semen production system it's very similar to what we see here from a quality standpoint.
Great. So did you have something, Mario?
No, nothing to add.
Okay. So the last follow-up question, Philippe, this is probably more directed towards you. But can you talk a little bit about drenched trace mineral products for cows? You talked about the injectable, but can you touch on those drench type products?
Yeah, I never worked with those directly, right? But what I know about them is that most of the time people use those drenches for animals that are gonna go through a severe stress, right? So, for example, weaning, shipping, right? Those are the type of calves that you might want to do that as a supplement, right? Just to boost their trace mineral reserves. It's definitely not a substitute for a regular supplementation, a trace nutritional program, right? So usually most of the time, 99% of the problems with trace minerals, if you have a good supplement and you make sure that they're consuming the target amount, and you make sure you adjust for the antagonist, like Dr. Hall mentioned before, that's more than enough for the animals to perform, right? For those mature counts. Now, for those animals undergoing stress and they need these extra reserves of trace minerals, those drenches, they seem to work, right? But again, it's just a supplement. It's not a substitute for the regular trace mineral program.
That's great, thanks. And I would agree again there, Philippe. I've looked into those products a little bit, and most of the time they talk about them as using for receiving calves, weaning, things like that. So they can be a great product, but a regular trace mineral program is probably the best way to go there. So that was all the questions we had from the group, and we're a little bit over our hour time slot anyway. So we really appreciate everybody logging on and joining us and adding great questions to the Q&A. I think we had some really great discussions amongst us. So that was really great. Thank you to the panelists for all coming on and joining and answering those questions. Again, this will be recorded. We will get this up on our YouTube page and it'll be linked on the website. So feel free if you miss something, please go back and watch it. If you didn't get a chance to ask your question or you think of something later, you're feel free to reach out to us. We have the Ask the Expert tab on our beefrepro.org website. We are happy to answer questions, so please go use that. And we hope to see you guys all at the May webinar. So thanks again.